Da, 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 da. All right. So anyway, welcome. This is the first in a series of podcasts that we're going to do, and it's called Wide Awake in Babylon. And the reason I wanted to put this together is, I take in a lot of information. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I interact with a lot of people. And I think there's some things that, are being overlooked, while we're staring into the world around us, while we're staring into the tragedies unfolding around us. I'm more interested in, hey, what's going on inside of us? So this podcast will be dedicated to that. We'll be talking about consciousness, lots and lots of consciousness. My name is Christopher Douglas. I'm 52, so I'm in my, sixth decade on this planet, fifth decade on this planet. And I've had a lot of interesting experiences, and so I wanted to start sharing those in the world a little bit, because I think the things that I've learned from the people I've met, the experiences I have, are translatable to others. And I think maybe they can pick up on some things and, kind of take back this mind so it doesn't go into crazy in town so much, that it doesn't, go into warped visions of reality, so it can stay stable enough so we can have life force inside of us, to be able to bring that back. And then that way we can match the intensity of the world around us with the intensity we got flowing out of us. That's been my interest my entire life. A little bit about me. So, the first few of these, it's just going to be me by myself on camera. I've got a couple gentlemen here, the engineers and the friends. And if they ask questions, we'll definitely interact with them. But they'll be off camera for the first couple episodes. And after that, we'll get rolling and, start having guests and have more people involved. But the first few, I just really wanted to express myself, give you a little bio about me, so maybe you can get to know where I'm coming from. I've had many, many teachers in my life. The ones of note is Carlos Castaneda. I spent 2 years with him. Yes, I catch a lot of flack for saying that you didn't know him. I get a lot of that stuff. But anyway, the man I met that I'll be telling many stories about, as far as I know, is Carlos Castaneda. No one has been able to prove it differently. Definitely the things I experienced with him lend themselves to some pretty magical things, some pretty powerful things. When I say that, I mean pragmatic as well. I don't mean flighty and, off the rails. It's just very practical, very grounded lessons. I think it's really interesting that, Carlos put out a series of books. He wrote the Don Juan series, and there's 10 or 11 of them in it. And what we get from that is we get a teaching of a man by the name of Don Juan. And Don Juan was a Yaqui medicine man that Carlos had known and wrote several books about. But we're getting Don Juan. And there is no real Carlos in there other than you might get a feel for who he is in the book. But the man I knew was in his 70s, mid-70s. And he had accomplished a lot of things in his life. And he had his own set of teachings. He had his own set of, here's what he had to offer. He remained pretty much incognito, was not known, not interviewed, not photographed. There is rumors out there that he was doing 10 Integrity workshops in California. But, I've never seen a flyer, a video, an interview, and anything that looked legit that ever came my way. We do have pictures of him. I have some signed books of his. I have some drawings he did. I have some writings he did and signed. So, I'll be sharing those as well. They're on my Facebook page. If you just go through the Facebook gallery, they're down in there somewhere. But yeah, I spent 2 years with him prior to him leaving the earth. And that time with him really shaped my life in a big, big way. And it continues to. The impact he had on me is, it's still unfolding. I'm in my 50s and it's still unfolding. That was when I was 25 to 27 years old. So, that was a while ago. And it's been very hard to implement all of this kind of information all of this inspiration and motivation towards something that seems impossible to most. Basically, I needed to know what was looking out of my eyes. I needed to know where it was coming from, and I needed to know why I could make such a mess of that. I really needed to know that. So that was one of my teachers. Another one of my teachers that I spent some time with as well, his name was Joseph High Eagle. And Joseph High Eagle was a Lakota medicine man. He was living in Mancos, Colorado with his wife, Twyla. And I was part of a medicine group back in, I guess it would have been 91, 92 at the time, locally here where I live. And it was called the Medicine Circle. And it was ran by this woman named Irene Fire Dancer. And she was a Nez Perce medicine woman. A very beautiful lady, very beautiful lady. And she had a place down in Colorado Springs. And, you know, at that time, the elders, long since passed, but the elders of that time in the Lakota tribe, in the Navajo tribe, in the Apache, they kind of were coming off the res and doing little workshops around the country. I mean, this is before this really became a thing. This is back when it was, you know, the natives, basically. And her house was kind of like, I call it the Underground Railroad. That's what I always called it, the Underground Railroad for medicine men, medicine women, grandfathers, grandmothers of the indigenous, because that's where they'd come. They wouldn't stay in hotels. They definitely had to be driven, you know, too old to drive, don't have a driver's license, some kind of something going on. So there was a group of young people around. I was one of them. And we basically drove them around, bought groceries, made sure they got where they needed to go, took care of any kind of thing they were going to do, and spent a lot of time with them. And there were many, many that came through those doors. And I got to sit down with all of them for long periods of time. And the thing that really interested me about them was this presence they had. You know, I'm a white kid from the suburbs, you know, so, and I'll get into that here in a minute because I kind of want to start from the beginning because I think it's pertinent to where we're going, you know, where I want this podcast to go. I think it's pertinent to know, you know, some things of the past, disclosing certain things. You know, that way you get a better feel for who this guy in front of you actually is and who you're listening to possibly. Yeah, so I got to spend a lot of time with them, and it was their presence. It was this exuding, energetic presence that kind of, it didn't really matter what was going on. It kind of permeated you in a way that you felt more alive. That kind of, your dignity rises up. To me, dignity is like the presence of spirit filling you up. That's dignity to me. And they had it. You know, they didn't have a lot of money. No, they didn't have big education. They didn't have fancy cars. You know, they were not those kinds of people. They were definitely living on reservations. But I found that their wisdom was far more influential to me than that of the culture that I'm coming from. You know, the American culture. I didn't really enjoy it very much. So I spent most of my 20s, you know, chopping wood, carrying water for elders, spent time with elders, driving elders around. So I wasn't in clubs. I was married by 25 and had 2 children. So, you know, and before that, it was working with elders, walking what they call the warrior's way. And back then, in those days, which, you know, God, it's quite a while ago now, right? 30 years ago, somewhat. It was different. The way that the medicine world, the spiritual community, it was a much different thing back then. There was definitely the elements of people who weren't serious about it. But the elders themselves were very serious about it. And as long as you showed a deep interest and you paid attention and, you know, you focused on the things that they wanted you to see, they would take notice of that and they would take you in for a deeper understanding of what they're referring to. And they, you know, they have their own way of talking. It was just interesting to me because as I listened to them, it was like it was translatable to this Western idea of the world that we're all living in. At least for me, it was. I would say that, you know, just being able to have that wisdom from them and to be able to overlay my world with that understanding helped me immensely to stay out of trouble, to understand conflict as it was arising, and to truly face the beast when it was in your face, to stare it down and deal with it, not to run. So, you know, I've never been afraid of conflict. I've had much of it in my life. I've brought a lot of it on. I'm not afraid of it. To me, I've always engaged it. And it was that warrior way of engaging it. And, you know, I understand today we're in a different world. That absolutely makes sense to me. So I kind of, you know, it's interesting to see where this might fit as content inside of this big bubble of social media we got going on and voices out there. So I'm really kind of interested to see where this goes, because I kind of want to bring back an old element of what that teaching was, because it demanded personal responsibility. It demanded accountability. They demanded your attention, your awareness, your presence. And they weren't playing games, although they were very, very playful and joyful in the teachings they were giving. And it's not as esoteric as people might think. I think it's more common sense than anything else. I asked Carlos once, I said, Carlos, what is the medicine man? He says, Cristo of all, it's the man with the most common sense. And I said, well, you know, that doesn't seem like that's really that big of a deal. He says, if you see how rare common sense is, you would realize it's a very big deal. So from there, after 30 years, I completely understand what he's saying. You know, common sense is not a conceptual idea. It's being able to truly read your environment, free of any of your hang-ups, free of any of your need to be for it to be a certain way. And you just be able to engage what's there in a level. You can attain levels of participation with the world that you couldn't imagine. So that really stuck with me, and I've been working it ever since. There were many teachings I got from these guys that you didn't come to fruition. They didn't really. It was like there was a seed in there, but it didn't really germinate for 20, 30 years. I remember sitting with Carlos one day, and he was telling me something big, long. It was like an hour long. He was talking. And I'm trying to pay attention as much as I can. I'm trying to really take in the content of what he was saying. And he stops in for a second. He looks at me. He's like, Cristobal, do you understand what I'm saying? And I said, It's like, well, how much do you think you're understanding? And I said, maybe 10 to 15%. And he looks at me and says, oh, well, that's okay, because it's not really for you anyway. And I said, well, wait a minute. If you're telling me this is not for me, then who's it for? He said, oh, it's for the you you're going to become. So, and then he would just keep talking. And I would come to this place, 20 years later. I'm in a situation. It's a little tense. There's decisions that need to be made that need to be accurate. They need to have impeccability. They need to be made now. Just kind of situations in life with people, with relationships and all the things. And all of a sudden, it was like time would freeze. And I'd hear that conversation play back in my head. And the things it was pointing out were right in front of me. It was as if he had somehow jumped into the future, saw the situation I was going to be in, spoke to it, and then when I got to it, I heard him there as much as I didn't hear him when I was younger. If that makes any sense. So, there's a lot of profound things that, that I went through with Carlos that I will definitely talk about. There was a lot of tactful behaviors I learned from him, how to understand what identity is, how to understand what's attacking us at all times. I mean, all kinds of content there. And I've been asked, when are you going to write a book? When are you going to write a book? And that's not me. Carlos wrote the books. I would like to be more of a live face, and I would like to more engage people. So that way I can get a more personal feel for this. So people can get a personal feel for the content of what I have to say about that whole experience. It wasn't woo-woo by any stretch. There were some interesting things. I don't call them woo-woo, but there were definitely some interesting things. So anyway, like I said, I'm a suburban white guy. I was born in Virginia, moved to Omaha, Nebraska. I grew up there until I was 15 years old. And then we moved to California. And while I was living in Omaha, Nebraska, I had a lot of interesting experiences growing up. Just go ahead and say it. People think what they'll think. I always felt there was like something extra going on here. I mean, from the time I can remember or have memories, that I always felt like something more was going on that everybody was either ignoring or was just unsure of. There was this extra element to life that made it, to me, exciting, made it adventurous. It made it like this real big thing that was kind of mysterious, but kind of nurturing as well. And I always, had this kind of question, what's looking at my eyeballs? What is that? Where is that looking from? How come no one can tell me about that? I can be told all the things about the world, but who can tell me about this? What is this? Who am I? What, that whole thing. And it came on early. It came on young. It wasn't like something that came in my 40s in a midlife crisis. It came as a child. I remember many nights where I would just stand in the bathroom and stare in the mirror. And I would just stare and stare and stare. My mother would walk by and, what are you doing? It's like trying to see where I'm coming from. And she would just walk by and shake her head. But I mean, that was an honest answer. I was definitely trying to see where what was looking out of my eyeballs was looking from. And seeing if I could look at it in the mirror. It just was interesting because there was just something there. And I always noticed that when things would happen, that there was this extra component of handling things. Where some of my friends in the neighborhood, something would happen and they would just go to breakdown. Something would happen in my life and it wouldn't go straight to breakdown. There would be this kind of, I wouldn't say numbing feeling. It was more like a presence that would be there and have me seeing it and just maintaining a stability through it. I think really to avoid any kind of traumatic outcome or traumatic experience. It's almost like holding the ground. I'm when I was a child, I was always interested in when it was cowboys and Indians, that's what we did back then, late 70s. That's what we were doing, playing cowboys and Indians. I was always the Indian. I was always interested in it, always looking into it, always fascinated by it. And, fascinated by the warrior chief of the old, they used to have these movies that would play on TV, that always the Indian was always the stoic, powerful warrior one. And I always looked up to that kind of element. I remember growing up, my mother's father had that element too. He had that element of presence and just a strong presence, a defender of life, a defender of family kind of feeling. And I always really appreciated that. I enjoyed that a lot. It was important to have that in my life. And so, that was kind of the thing where when things would happen in my life, that could have gone sideways young, that I had this ability to kind of stand my ground, not overdo it so much, although when we're young, we probably do. And my memory probably fails to see where I was a little shit in all of it, but, so be it. But yeah, I always had this ability to kind of withstand the effects that I saw some of my other friends go through. I do remember some things that were quite frightening as a child. I would have this shadow that would visit me. And it definitely was something outside of me. I mean, I could see it. It had form. It didn't have definition or detail, but it had form. Kind of a humanoid form. But you couldn't see, any detail of what it looked like. And it would be about 6 feet tall. And I ran into that thing a lot at my house. In the 70s, 80s, living in Omaha, Nebraska, it's a pretty safe place. The kids could be left at home. Neighbors were around. They'd be watching the kids. All the neighbors knew each other. That was the element back then. And so, my parents would work late. My sisters would be at after school activities that were part of groups. It'd be like late fall, early winter. It's getting dark around 5 o'clock. All the kids have to go in when the street lights go on. And, I'd come home and it would be about a half hour before anybody else got home. And so I'd come home on my bike, and it didn't happen all the time, but it happened enough that it really stunned me. I would come home, no one would be there. I'd open the front door, and at the top of the stairs, there would be this shadow that would sit there and stare at me. And I would just feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I'd feel almost just so repulsive inside of myself and just shudder, afraid. And I would walk back out the door and just get on my bike and just ride in circles around the driveway until someone else came home. And as long as someone else came home, then it wouldn't be there and I'd be fine. I was always scared of the basement, so I kind of figured maybe that's where it lived. I mean, as a kid, I'm thinking this. It's not something I'm projecting my adult life into. That definitely was in my mind as a kid. It's like, oh, it lives down by the washer and dryer in the unfinished basement. And this went on, for a while. I never said anything about it, because you always kind of wonder, is that just my imagination? Am I getting sick? Because sometimes you get a little, weird hallucinations when you start getting the flu or a cold, or you get perceptual movement going on. You're not quite sure what you're seeing. Depth perception goes off, that kind of thing. But, seeing it stand there was always definitely shocking to my system. And then one night I'm in bed, and this is, one of the earliest wild experiences that I have had. I was going to bed. I'm laying there. There's light that's coming in from the hallway because the hallway light's on. And then there's the door. In the frame of the door, the light's coming through it. Then where my bed is out the window, there is a street light. That light comes in my window as well and lights up my room. And I'm laying there, and all of a sudden this shadow is at the foot of my bed. And it's just looming over me. Looming, and I could just feel its presence. And it just kind of felt like it just pushed me down and just pushed me into myself. And I just felt like, what I would say now, I don't really know what I thought as a kid when that went on. But now looking back, it was like it was draining my life force. It was just draining this force that helps me maintain a steady, function in a steady way here on this planet, so to speak. And it just felt like it was draining that out of me, like, becoming hopeless and terrified and just, almost like you're being killed in a way. It's kind of, seems like that's where it was sitting. And I'm trying to scream, but I can't make a noise. And I just kept thinking, someone help me, someone please help me. And what was interesting about this shadow is that the light coming from underneath the bedroom door and the light coming from the street light, it kind of bent into this thing. So it kind of made it, right? So it's almost like it's using the power of the artificial light to loom over me. It's kind of what it seemed like. And after that, I'm sitting there just laying there, help me, help me, help me. And I see this light out my window come in through the window, just went right through the window, but the shadow was not pulling the light from it. The light wasn't bending into the shadow like the way the street light and the hallway light was. And it comes in and it turns into a man standing there. He's wearing all white. He's got long hair. He's got a beard, right? I don't know who this person is, but they're standing there. And the more interesting thing about it was he was illuminated. It was like, you could see the features, but he was illuminated. So he was emanating like a light off of him. And he looks over at me, comes over to me, puts his hand on my forehead. He says, "You're going to be okay." And I just felt this wave of peace, like all my life force rushed back into my body. And what I watched was him walk over to that shadow, and there wasn't a battle. There was a matter-of-fact conversation. I couldn't understand the words being said, but the mood of it was the authority was the man made of light. And don't know what he said to him, but that shadow just shriveled up, disappeared, and I never saw it again. Right? And shortly thereafter, my father decided to finish the basement of that house, turned it into, my sister had a bedroom down there, and it turned into a rec room, a recreation room for kids. So we had foosball and air hockey, It was the 80s. Atari, the whole thing, and all the kids in the neighborhood would come hang out at my house. yeah, so it was interesting how, those things unfolded. It's like, because I really felt like that's down there somewhere, hanging out down there, whatever it is. And that it never visited me again, but I remained curious about what that was. That really stuck with me. And matter of fact, it really has all my life. It still sticks with me. But it's a different thing now. And we will definitely get into that in further episodes into this podcast. So if you're interested in continuing listening to it, we'll definitely get into those aspects because I think it's important. And I think it's universal. And it just really depends on what belief systems were put into you or what conditions you live by to understand, these things. Because a lot of times it's chalked up to, I just don't know how I'm feeling. It's just my imagination, a lot of things where it could be something else entirely. And, that's just really been, the path of my work over my years is understanding what that is. I mean, I don't really, for me, in order for people to truly attain a state of bliss, of enlightenment, whatever anyone wants to call that place where your mind is quiet, your life force is flowing, everything is good, you're fed, you're not afraid of not being alive. It's like it's perfect. Right? I don't really think that can happen until the side of life that we've been neglecting is really stared at. I don't remember who said it, but, the real act of the hero, the warrior, is to stare into the abyss and let it stare back at you and not flinch. I think that's a massively important thing for, the evolution of human beings, where we go next, what our consciousness is going to be like. So anyway, those were my experiences, young. By 14, I'm picking up books on shamanism. I'm picking up books on Native American elders. I'm reading The Sacred Pipe, who it was written about a man by the name of Nicholas Black Elk, who was Lakota elder, medicine man, really, really incredible man. And just interestingly enough, Joseph Heigl, that was his teacher, was Nicholas Black Elk. So spending time with Joseph Heigl was pretty interesting because I got to hear a lot about the stories of the Carlisle School in New York, which was the Reformation School for Indians, about going over to England and being put in cowboy and Indian shows and then being put in cages and put on display like zoo animals when the shows weren't going on. Interesting stories. He had written a book on how to teach Indian children, things like that. So, it was, pretty profound. But I started reading on that young, reading those books. So, there's Black Elk Speaks, there's The Sacred Pipe, there's a few other ones. And I really got into those. And, in the books on shamanism, I found it just, I don't know, they just didn't really hit me that hard. Just kind of seemed to me like duh. It was a bunch of duh, especially with the kind of experiences I had had already. Picked up Carlos Castaneda's book when I was probably 15 years old, and it wasn't even that I picked it up. I was feeling like reading. I hadn't finished that many books, by that time. I started becoming a voracious reader. I wanted to get my hands on info that, told me more about, these experiences and maybe possibly shedding some light on what's looking out of my eyeballs from someone else's perspective. And so I'm just walking down in the library, just strutting around. Book comes flying off the shelf, lands. Look down, it's Carlos Castaneda, Separate Reality. The cover is what grabbed me because it's just a faceless man floating off the ground and all the landscape, the trees are floating off the landscape. And it just kind of evoked something in me. And so I picked that up and I read it, fascinated by it, and then put it down and didn't touch his books for quite a while. Through my high school years, I dealt with, I was a chunky kid, right? So I was a chunky kid. I remember, in middle school, I had to have surgery on this ear. And, it was healing up. And as it was healing up, it stunk to high hell. And, I'd be in school and sitting there. And all the kids would be, "Ew, what does that smell?" And just look at me and go, "Ew," and go running away. And I would just have to sit there and that just, oh my God. Boy. I mean, I know we all have those stories, but holy shit, just feeling so, so low, but still it was interesting because even through that, I mean, all the teasing as a kid, I mean, my name's Chris Douglas. So in school, it was Chris Dickless. It was, my name's Chris Douglas. So it was Christy. Hey, Christy. Hey, Christy. So, all the teasing the kids did, I mean, we had it pretty harsh back then too. It got pretty rough, but it was interesting because I handled it well. I maintained, embarrassment. Yeah, we all visit that. There was a lot of it as a kid, but it was interesting because, you look back at that formulated you. Right. And so to go back and look at those things, you get to see how far you've come. So it's kind of a nice thing to, not necessarily still have trauma about, but to have like, oh yeah, I remember those days. And hopefully never forget them because from humble beginnings come us all. So, definitely dealt with that a lot. And then in high school, it wasn't so much, but, it was still there. I was always that kid in school that, tried to be witty, tried to be funny, tried to be smart, outwit my teachers. If they, had some kind of comment, that I would have some snarky comment back. The jocks in school, I would always tease them. It's like, I know you can play football, but I doubt you could spell it. Just mess with them and take it to the edge sometimes. Never really got in many fights. Wasn't really my thing. There was a few. Skirmishes, if you will. But, through high school, it was, pretty much your standard high school. I do remember in the 80s, Duran Duran was huge. It was like the biggest band on earth at the time. And pre-teen, like 16 and under, well, like 12 to 16, nightclubs were popping up for kids to go dancing and playing Duran Duran. And there was kids in school and the dudes who had, I was one of them. Put on eyeliner, right? Flare your hair back, put on, the foundation, wear the trench coat, looking like you're in Duran Duran. That was my kick as a kid. It was kind of how I did it. Well, it was to get girls. That, let's just be honest. That's what it was all for. It's, you got to wear the face the girls want, and they were all into Duran Duran. So, kind of got us a little more attention than we probably would have gotten anyway. So, dated in, just pretty much a regular time. I wasn't really getting into much trouble yet. Then, at high school, we moved to California. Like I said, we moved there when I was 16 from Omaha. Growing up in Omaha as a kid, you had free reign. We had dirt bikes and spent most of our time on those. Built, little forts out in the woods, stuff like that. When we moved to California, I mean, that was a bit of a culture shock. I'm going from a school that, might have a couple hundred kids in it, and maybe a few more, but, it wasn't a big place. Omaha might have had 80,000 people in it, if even that. And moved to Southern California in Mission Viejo, which is right in the middle of Orange County. It's up against the Saddleback Mountains, just west, or I guess that would be east, just east of like the Laguna Beach area. And went to El Toro High School. And I showed up in my, I think it was 9th grade. Yeah, 10th grade, 9th, 10th grade. Chronologically, I don't really. Back there, one of those, let's see, she's 15, yeah, 9th grade. Moved to California, and I'm going to a school that has 1,000 kids in it. And they're driving Beamers, and there's all kinds of things going on. Omaha was still pretty much a sleepy little place. As kids, we snuck some beers. Never heard of marijuana. Cocaine. You might have heard the word, but you never knew what it was referring to. It wasn't really a thing there. So when we got to Southern California and I was enrolled in my high school, I got to see I was blown away. I got a class of 40 kids. There's kids snorting cocaine out of their high school books. They're like in science. This kid would have his book and he would open it and he had like a folded piece of paper in there and he just right out of his book. And I remember in science class, the guy that taught it, when we were having to do like, some quiet work or do some project, he would just sit with the newspaper up. these two guys by the back door would just open the door, light a joint, and just blow it out the door. I was stunned. I was stunned. There was, shady characters, rich kids. I mean, the whole thing. And it was far more socially than I ever dealt with in my life. And adapting was pretty difficult for me because in May, we moved there in May, school's out, like in a few weeks. So I never really got a chance to make friends. And when you're in a big city like that, everybody's got their friends group and there's got to be some, special interest in you or some kind of notice for you to get accepted by anybody, at that time. So I basically spent my summer walking up and down the bike paths of Southern California and just taking it all in. And, it was an interesting time because I don't think too many kids get a chance to have an introspective time in the midst of their youth. I think, some of that friend making in a new town can happen rather quickly. Sometimes you're moving somewhere where, you kind of already have some familiarity with the people. It just wasn't the case for me. So I just walked for like 3 months. Friday nights, I would walk, just sit on the edge of everything going on, maybe walk through all the little, because back then the people hung out at fast food restaurants. So like the big parking lots, all the kids would hang out there. I'd walk by and just, kind of see if I could find a way in, but, just not really flowing with it. Would always just walk back home, walk for miles and miles and miles and miles. But it was good to spend time with myself. It wasn't a whole lot of thoughts. It was just like processing energy, basically. Just processing all these feelings. And, it was kind of cool because I think, the feelings I was processing could have been kind of depressing. But the excitement of living in such a big place with so much going on and little shops of all kinds of special curiosities all over the place, so it was an interesting place to be. So I think just the excitement of it all kind of kept my spirits up while I looked through all these kind of social quirks, idiosyncrasies, little fears, little feelings of inadequacy. I mean, all those things, that you feel growing up. It was just kind of nice to have some time to really just be with that. First kids to accept me were the punkers. Right. And when I came out of Omaha, punk music was getting pretty big, so that's the kind of crowd I ran around with. I was that kid, 8 years old, mowing lawns and listening to the Sex Pistols. That was the stuff I liked. Probably more like 10, but somewhere back there in my youth, just put on the Sex Pistols, God Save the Queen, and mow the yard. I loved it. After a while, started making friends. Go to punk shows, spent a lot of time at Fender's Ballroom. Lived pretty close to Irvine, which is like uni high. So, all the skateboarders were coming out of that area, Anaheim and uni high and down San Juan Capistrano. And the punk bands of the days were coming up through there. So you could go, over to Anaheim Hills, and one of these skaters would have a house that they bought because they were sponsored, and they'd have a half pipe in the backyard, and then they have bands playing. And that was always fun. Went to Fender's Ballroom, like I said, went to Fender's Ballroom a lot. And then, kind of that lifestyle got violent. I mean, it was, but going to Fender's Ballroom and seeing, the underbelly of it all just kind of lost its thing for me. I just was not really into it anymore. And I'm still in high school at this time. And then from there, someone turned me on to the Grateful Dead, started listening to that. Well, you know where that leads. That leads to smoking marijuana. So first time I tried marijuana, I was 17. So, it's funny because I know a lot of people are like, oh, I smoked weed at 12. It's like 12? Holy crap, man. That's just nuts. How did you do that? 17, I thought, looking back seems kind of young too, but I dove into it pretty good. Didn't smoke a lot at first, but just kind of tried it when I was around friends, mainly on the weekends. Started using a little bit. And from there it was on to LSD, which, I'm just going to be honest because, if you want to know where I'm coming from, this is part of it, as crazy as it might make me sound. And I'm sure it will. So what we ended up doing is, this is how LSD came into my life. This is the, I'll tell you, it's high school, right? I'm a senior in high school. I'm taking water polo. It's easy class. Yeah, just got to play water polo, which was interesting because I was in the class with all the stoners and all the guys that smoke cigarettes. You know, the ones that listen to heavy metal music, wore leather jackets, and looked really unhealthy, kind of overweight. Those guys. Yeah. So they couldn't play water polo anyway. They're wheezing and coughing and out of shape. So inevitably the teacher would be like, look, just be in the pool. You know, you don't, it's ridiculous for you guys to even try to do that. So just be in the pool. So, you know, it's jumping off the diving boards, basically just hanging out. And it's the last period of the day. You know, I think it's probably like April. But this time I got a few more months of high school left. And a friend of mine comes up to me, or, you know, friend enough, comes up to me and says, hey man, you want to buy some acid? And I'm like, what? He's like, do you want to buy some acid? I'm like, well, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, like from the lab? What did you do, steal it from the science room? He's like, no, LSD. I'm like, LSD, I've heard of that. And by that time I'd heard it, but I didn't know what it was. I had no interest in knowing what it was. And he said, yeah, LSD, it's acid. And you trip. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, he looks at me, he's like, have you ever smoked weed? I said, yeah, I've smoked weed. He's like, it's like that. It's just like 10 times better. I'm like, oh, that sounds pleasant, you know, because, you know, the weird paranoias of weed didn't last with me very long. You know, the tunnel vision and the when you first do it. Yeah, it just didn't really, you know, I was cool with that. It was like I had enough kind of waves through consciousness over time that I was okay with this thing being altered. It wasn't making me nuts. It's like there was a me that saw that this was a filter that I could see the world through in a different way, but it didn't really change the behavior of the person inside. You know, that was to come later. Really, I mean, the crash and burns with, you know, plants over the years and, you know, just psychedelics over the years. You know, not really a crash and burn, definitely a crash and learn, but, you know, not really a crash and burn. You know, I'm 52, so I'm here doing pretty well. So yeah, I feel pretty put together even after all that. But anyway, he asked me if I wanted to buy some acid. And I said, well, sure, I'll buy some. How much is it? He said, it's $2 for a hit. And a hit was these little black gel tabs, little squares. You know, and he had 5 of them all together. And I had a $10 bill in my pocket. I said, well, I got $10. Here, just give me 5 of them. Right? So he gives me this little, it's just all in a strip. Gives them to me. And I put them in a little foil cigarette wrapper, stick in my pocket. And don't think about it. You know, finish out school. I was that kid that, you know, skipped a lot of school the first part of my senior year. So the second part of my senior year going through high school, I had to be in school from like 7 a.m. till 9 p.m. And I would go for school, 8 periods, take a half hour off, go do a crop class for extra credit. And then after that, go do night school. So, I mean, I had to make up because I wasn't going to flunk. I needed to graduate. And I didn't really, you know, I took it seriously enough. I got a good education, you know, how to read, write, you know, do all the things. You know, most of the information I realized I was taught, you know, turned out to not be so true after all as I'm growing up. So I don't really look back at, you know, the fact that I didn't pay that much attention to be all that important to who I am as a person anyway. And yeah, so, you know, took that, finished up my day, got home from night school, was walking in my door. And my parents were out of town because they would take off on the weekends. My father owned a company and was busy most of the week, so he would take the weekends, and him and my mom would just go. My sisters by this time were already out, you know, grown, graduated, had kids, living at home, but, you know, they were there. And they were out doing their things. And I was walking up, getting the house keys out of my pocket, and I remembered, oh, I bought that acid today. Right? And so I look at it and I just decided, well, you know, let's just do them all. So put all 5 in there. And I remember him telling me, you know, drink orange juice, it'll make it more colorful. So I go to the refrigerator and grab a jug of orange juice and I just go sit out on the back deck and wait for it to come on. And honestly, when it did, it didn't faze me at all. I don't mean that I handled it perfectly. I wouldn't say that. I was stunned But what it was opening up inside of me, I mean, the feeling I had inside of me was extremely familiar. Extremely familiar. And I had been, like I said, I was always interested in shamanism, Buddhism. I read those books, growing up, looking at this stuff, in my teens. Not really ever getting a feel for it. Getting like maybe a picture painted in my head, but not a feel for what all this actually is, how that correlates to the experience I'm having as a being on a planet. And that was definitely present. And, I was sitting in the backyard staring at this tree, and the tree's, communicating with me, and I'm communicating with it. I know that sounds, it's cliche, and you hear that from people a lot and those things. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of what it was. It was just this amplification of energy and this feeling that me and that tree don't have that. We have much more in common than we don't. I could see these like strands of energy that would come down. It would kind of paint the tree in place. It was very interesting, very introspective. Okay, and then I sat back there for a while. Then I felt like going for a drive, which, I know is very irresponsible. So I was very irresponsible. I don't condone that. Do not do that. But I didn't feel like it was really affecting me in a way that I didn't have good judgment, whether it being in a car. And, we lived on a place, where it's called the Ortega Highway down by San Juan Capistrano. And, you couldn't really, you could get out in the middle of nowhere where there was no traffic. So I would drive down there, and I drove on the 15, down to San Diego, and then shot back up to San Bernardino, and then came back and came home. I remember coming home probably in the morning, right around 5:30, 6 a.m. And I was going to walk in the front door, and I told myself I'm going to be doing a lot more of that. There was something in that experience beyond, just, I was tripping and I saw this and I saw that. Yeah, none of that's really important to me. There was a presence there. There was some kind of knowing that took all of this confusion, all of this awkwardness in me, and kind of made me look at it. So while I was driving up and down these roads, I was in this deep state of introspection, looking at my behavior, looking at motivations. Why do I do this way? Noticing that, something would be going really well, and all of a sudden this thing would come out of me and turn it into the most awkward situation ever. And that was always a pretty stunning experience. And I found that LSD brought me to this place where it was like I was my own therapist. And, and I did. I looked at myself as honestly as I could at the time. And did. Boy, did I. I mean, I really looked. I looked at, why do I act this way? Just, the things that, we don't really talk about in society, as a society. But, the inner workings of us, those inner kind of quirks that we're trying to work out as people, And I guess the reason I never really wanted to get into it with anybody, because I kind of went into psychedelics. I had a couple friends that did it, the same way I did. We weren't out to party. We were really into like exploration of things. And so the few people that, would come around and do it was me by myself mainly, and then one other friend, and then there's a girl that came and hung out with us a lot, and then maybe a couple others, but that was about it. And it was just a real big exploration into, this thing called life. It just felt more animated, felt more receptive. I felt more receptive to it. I felt like I was picking up on, signals and information from energetic patterns that I could see in the air that seemed intelligent and kind of gave me information about me, mainly, about how I'm going to, what to do in the world, what move to make, what road is lighting up kind of thing. And I was fascinated by it. So I spent a lot of time doing that. I mean, it pretty much was the weekends. Me and these friends would go camping. We would go up into the San Gabriel Mountains, hike back 5 miles, and take a bunch of LSD, and did that a lot, quite a bit, and then found mushrooms, and that really kicked things in a different gear for me. This is all unraveling within months. From the first time, it was just dive in full force. My parents, they knew, but I think, I'll ask my mom, because I'm going to do an episode with my mom. I'm going to have her on this. But, I think that they didn't understand what I was doing, but they saw that I wasn't going off the deep end. I wasn't becoming a druggie. I mean, I held down jobs, in order to pay for all this. You kind of had to. So it wasn't like I wasn't working and just running around being a vagrant. I mean, I kept myself together, I could still be courteous and aware and attentive in situations with people. That was never that difficult for me anyway. I was kind of a gregarious person in that. I love people. They're just fascinating to me. So, but yeah, they didn't really interfere in it much at all, actually. And so, the mushrooms really brought what I would call a spiritual element to it. By this time I'm, late 17, almost 18, in those years, summer before I'm 18. And really got deep with those, I graduated from high school in June of 1988. I got some money. This friend of mine, Jaffo, got a car. It wasn't a cool car. It was a 1981 Toyota Celica. It was blue. And the people around us, our peer group, referred to it as the blue oven. And because we were always baking in it. That was the term back then you used, right? You used the term baking for taking acid or, psychedelics of any kind. So, he was one of those friends that was pretty much with me in this, in the thick of it, just really going for it. And we decided that we were going to take the 3 months of summer before we made any decisions about going to college or any of those things. And we were going to dive into these psychedelics in a really big way. And so we went out and bought ourselves 1,000 hits of LSD. It's cheap, You're getting it, $50 for 100. It's 50 cents a piece. So we bought some of that, bought a bunch of mushrooms, picked a bunch of mushrooms because there's a place on the coast in California. They were just abundant. And so they were cheap there anyway because they were everywhere. Got a bunch of those back in the day. I haven't seen it in years and years and years, on the market anywhere, but they used to have these things that were called strawberry and chocolate mescaline. And they were these little barrels, like these little cylinders, like little tubes. They're about that tall. And they were like buffered, like powder all smashed together. I mean, if you put them between your fingers, they'd break. But you take 2 or 3 of those, and it was like you were dreaming while you were awake. So we did ourselves a bit of what I would call a fear and loathing in Southern California. I'd never heard of Hunter S. Thompson. I had never read the book. It was just one of these things that popped into my life. And so we decided that we were going to go 3 months and just do it as much as we can. I think we put 15 to 20,000 miles on that car over that time. We drove all over California, Nevada, parts of Arizona. We'd go out to the desert. There's a place called Joshua Tree we'd go to. Then we'd go up into Mammoth Mountain. And then we'd go out, onto the Sequoias and just travel, just drive around, park wherever, sleep there for the night, put up a tent. It was interesting. We parked in a corporate parking lot. It was called Unisys. It was in Laguna Hills, California. I don't know what they did. It was like a big, I guess, info company, maybe the start of what the tech companies are. But there was a parking lot there, and it was kind of blocked from seeing it from the road by this little embankment. So we just pulled up, and just to get a few Z's, which turns into passing out for the night. And a cop knocked on the window. You can't sleep here. You can't sleep here. I mean, we got all this stuff in the car, all of it. It could send you to prison for a long time. And nothing ever happened to us. He just said, "You guys got to move on." I mean, we were young, so lucky. But he just tells you, you got to move on. You got to, And that happened a couple times. One night, after we had to get some sleep, it's just, you're just cooked for the day. And we were driving down this canyon road, just looking for any place to pull over and sleep. I'm just about to pass out, just visions and, things warping and woofing. And I see this road, It's called Hunky Dory. I'm like, hey, that's a good place to get some rest. It's Hunky Dory. Hunky Dory, here we go. And there's this little, it stops and dead ends in this other road called Okie Dokie. I'm like, Okie Dokie. That's where we're going to sleep. Well, where it was there was a house below, a house above, and then there was, just barren land in between the two on a half slope, probably where someone was going to build a house, but there was nothing there. So we figured we'll just pull over there, no problem. I wake up in the morning to a guy tapping on the window with a shotgun, 2 dogs. And I just kind of crack the window and he just points the gun in the car and says, you can't sleep here. And so needless to say, we were up for the day after that point. Just went down to the beach, spent a lot of time sleep on the beach, just kind of ran around, go home once in a while. I remember I would come in and I think my mother's comment was, oh, I see the spaceship has landed, and then we would just pick up and go and keep going. And did that for 3 months. We would take the LSD until you got to the point where it wouldn't work anymore. You can take enough to where, you're taking 25 hits and it's not doing anything to you at all. It's like, so you've built up tolerance. So once we get to that point, we'd never let it go that far. But if you take 5 or 10 and it ain't going anywhere, then we would break into the mushrooms. And we would eat the mushrooms until your stomach just can't take another one of those. And then you go to the mescaline, because the mescaline always works. And, so you could just take one of those and just keep going. It was interesting, the stamina through that. It was like me and this friend of mine, who I have no idea where he is. I have no idea what happened to him. He ended up moving to a place up north of Los Angeles with his parents. That community was big into meth. He got into meth and we weren't friends anymore. I could not go that route. It was just, I'm staying away from all of that. So I didn't go into any of those things. So, but it was me and him pretty much doing this. So we took it to that point, and then it ended, and after that was over, learned a lot though. In those moments, there was, it was like we were in another layer of the world that we kind of joked that, here we are in a playground. Everyone else is in it, but they can't see it, just us. And we would always make those comments to one another because there was an element of more being alive, that we felt. And it was valuable to us. You say, well, that was a drug. Well, so be it. Everything is. Really, everything is. Everything's going to affect your mood in some way, affect your perception in some way. So, and I was able to handle that. And I was able to handle it well. Never, ever had a bad trip. I had rough ones, but never anything bad. It was never, rubbing, just digging in my own crap. Never. I've seen some people go sideways for sure. Because, when you're around that element, it can happen. Started going to lots of Grateful Dead shows. And that's where I really kind of found, for that time in my life, it's 91, 90, I'm 20, 1989. Got into the Grateful Dead big, started seeing them a lot. It started to see that whole scene as a way to live, which, worked out for a while. But then you start seeing the other side of things where's this really going? So I kind of stopped, turned a completely different corner and ended up joining the Navy. Just kind of things were going on. I had a girlfriend that was going down the wrong road and I didn't want to follow her down it. So all this beauty I found in doing that kind of led to this. It's like being able to peer into a world, another layer of the world no one sees. There's an element of you're not really knowing what you're dealing with either. So you could be weaving together things that you ought not to. And it can turn dark that way. Not evil and bad and nasty, but dark. Harder to deal with. A more morose kind of side of life. And that it started setting in quite a bit. And so, the thing you do is, didn't want to go to college, wasn't interested in that, didn't want to sit in a classroom for another 4 years. So I figured I'd join the Navy. And so I took the tests, got in the Navy, scored high enough that they had stuck me in what was called the Advanced Powers program, although I didn't make it out of boot camp. I mean, that's about as far as it went. Just, it was what it was. But yeah, when I went in under what was called the Advanced Powers program, which meant coming out of boot camp and a couple of years of school, you'd be an officer and then you do a sign-on bonus, you get all this extra money. So it was like a paved highway of a career. And I mean, just looking down, it was just, success all the way down. As long as I fulfilled all that work, and I really was about it. I really was. I was, getting ready to really commit myself to this. I had hair as long as I do now, actually longer because I was younger. And I went into the Navy that way. Watching all these, other guys in the Navy making fun of me with my long hair. There's one guy that brought a suitcase. They just kept throwing it down the hallway. You're on vacation. Go get your damn suitcase. Bring it back here. And they would throw it back down the hallway. And did this to this guy for like an hour. They just make you stand in line a lot. And anyway, I get in there, found a guy that, was in my company. He had brought some weed, right? We're like a week or two into boot camp, maybe 3. Doing pretty well. It was interesting because they would march you around and do, you would sleep like 3 hours a day. You go to bed at 11, they wake you up at 4, march you for hours, and trying to break you down, doing sleep deprivation for the first week was just insane. And it just never broke me. I had done all of that psychedelic stuff. And so, sleep deprivation was pretty kind of easy to handle, that fog of perception, because, some of those, you do enough LSD, you kind of get into a fog of perception. And, so I kind of was able to handle that, so I wasn't easy to break down. So they were always like, poking at me. And because I would just smile. I would just stand there and smile. Everybody, a couple of them were breaking down crying, wanting their moms. A couple of them want to go home. And I'm just standing there just kind of with this awkward smile on my face because I kind of liked the buzz of sleep deprivation. It was kind of fun at the time. Young. I'm 19 years old at the time. And so anyway, this friend of mine that was in there, he had found some weed that he had brought in. He forgot about. So we kind of went, smoked it, went and got a Coke can, drank the Coke, took the can, kind of crushed it, poked a bunch of holes in it, and just laid it on there and used it as a pipe to smoke it. And one of the guys in there that did not like it was this little black dude, mean as hell, and just teased every guy in there, and he was just horrendous, and really teased the white dudes a lot. I mean, he was racist. I would say that he definitely had a race. He did not like white people. There was no doubt about it. And, I'm kind of a smart ass. So, he had a name for me and I had a name for him. And I called him Choco Smurf. Just mean as hell. And just me and him clashed like crazy. So, take that into context. We're all a bunch of dudes hanging out in the barracks, dogging the shit out of each other, roasting the hell out of each other. They're getting the upper hand. You need to get the upper hand. So, those were our names. He had his as well for us, and they were equally as bad. So, it was just fair game. That's what it was. Again, it was the 80s. We shouldn't have to forgive ourselves for what we did in the 80s. That's what people do in the 80s. I know it's all sensitive now. Ooh, but back then it was funny. So anyway, caught us, smelled it, told on us, piss tested us. We were getting kicked out. So before you get kicked out, they're not like, you're out of here and here's your go home. No, you got to sit in separations for like 2 or 3 months while they process you out of the military. And I said, well, why can't you just go home while you do that? Well, we're responsible for you until you're processed out. So they had this special barracks, and it was for people being removed. And it was funny because, the other companies that were still in boot camp, they'd walk by it, and their commanding officer, drill instructor would point up and go, that's where all the sissies and faggots live, and just point up there. They can't make it. They're not good enough. And, we were like the outsiders on the base. And, you didn't just you weren't just waiting. It was kind of like jail in a way. You had to go to bed at a certain time. You had to get up at a certain time. So it was still like you were in the military and in boot camp. But it was just different in the fact that, you had to work, so you didn't just automatically get food. They'd send you out to do jobs on the base. And me and this friend of mine, they were sending us out for jobs. Like one of them would be shredding paper for some admiral somewhere, or doing this for a captain over here, mopping the office of the secretaries, general basic stuff that you do around a base. And you would have, so you'd get the permission to walk around. Well, they put us, me and this friend of mine, they put us in this place with a civilian that was working on the base. And that civilian had to go off base to pick up parts. He was a computer scientist guy. So again, this is back when it's really getting started, the whole computer era. So you'd have to go to Radio Shack or, places like that, little specialty shops for chips and stuff. And he would have us go with him. So while he was in the shop getting the things, we would jump out and go to the 7-Eleven and buy cartons of cigarettes. And then bring him back, and his office was a civilian office, so no one really went in there. So he would stash the cigarettes in his office, take a pack, and then go sit at the bus stop and sell them to people at $2 a piece. Because when you get into the military, you get this fake money. It's like monopoly money, but you can use it at the PX or you can turn it into cash. And we would take those and then have the people who had graduated boot camp who could turn it into cash. We would have them turn it into cash and give them kickback. And so we did this for probably 2.5 months, ended up making quite a bit of money, enough to, when we got kicked out, I got a bus ticket and $13 from the Navy. But I had enough money that I went and stayed in Walt Disney World for a week before I took that bus ride. And there was a girl so in the separations unit, usually the women are on one side of the base, men are on the other. But in the separation unit, the men were in one room, and down the hall, the women were in the other. So after all the COs would go to bed at night, the men and women would intermingle. And there was a girl there from California who was getting kicked out because they found traces of possible cancer in her, and just out you go. I mean, they would kick out people for being allergic to bee stings, flat-footed. If your ears didn't work right, they try to catch all that when you go through the entrance kind of exams. But, sometimes people slip through the cracks. And so it was just basically all those people that were getting removed. People had a warrant they weren't talking about. But we were definitely the misbehaviors on the base. That was an interesting time. It was a lot of fun. I wouldn't take it back. I mean, we would tease everybody. They used to give you this pass, so you'd have to walk on base, and you had to wear sweatpants that told them what rank you were, which is basically you don't have any freedom if you wear the sweatpants and the sweat outfit they give you with the big N on it. And they have these little papers, so if you wanted to walk anywhere on the base, you had to have this thing called a chit, and I would just have it hanging right out of my sweatpants. And I'd walk by and an officer would be standing there. He'd look at me and say, "What is that in your pants, sir?" And I'm like, "What is that in your pants, Private?" I'm like, "It's called chit, sir. I have chit in my pants." Get in trouble for it, but, ended up in the military getting put in sleepers a lot just for, being insubordinate, not respecting authority. And sleepers was you get 4 1-foot square tiles in a room, and you got to stay in those 4 square tiles for the day. You can get up for food, you can get up to go to the bathroom, but when you got up to go to the bathroom, you had to be watched. And I'm like, "Why you got to watch me go to the bathroom? I can't go to the bathroom with you watching me." He's like, "Well, we got to make sure you don't commit suicide." I'm like, I don't think you got anything to worry about. I'm not going to kill myself over this. But yeah, you'd have to just sit in these 4 little cubes. So I had to do that a lot. I remember when they were removing me, the captain called me to his office and looked at me. He's like, why'd you have to go and ruin it? You had yourself a career here, because before that I was, a star. I mean, I did everything I was supposed to, did it right, followed the rules, had respect, was really excited about this possible future. Yeah. He says, the only reason they tested you is because you're testing them. You could have just said, "Yes, sir," and been done with it, but you keep talking back. I said, "Well, they're asking us to do absurd things." He's like, "You're here to follow orders." I'm like, "I thought you guys wanted intelligent people here who thought for themselves." He's like, "Well, you're sadly mistaken. We don't want that in the military. What we want are people who are going to follow orders no matter what." So yeah, you don't really fit. I was supposed to get a dishonorable discharge and all this other stuff going on, possible problems, on a record. And he expunged it. He just kind of said, yeah, I'm not going to put this to you, but, just go ahead and, straighten your life out kind of thing. He was a really nice guy. I always got along with the older military dudes. There's a camaraderie there that I always admired. Because, the native guys had it too. And, and then the mafioso types, they had it too. That just kind of strong family. Not to say they're good people, but, they had that strong family unit. And I kind of admired that. And, I showed respect to it. So they would give you some attention and a little respect back, which was nice. So after I got removed from the Navy, I went back to Southern California, moved in with my parents for a short time, and then met my first wife. And after that, I wasn't 21 yet. I was still 19. And, we wanted to go party. So it turned in every weekend we'd go to Mexico. Because, we lived in Orange County, which it's like an hour and a half, 90 minutes. You're at the Mexican border. Park your car, walk across the border, go into Tijuana, and throw down for the night. That was a lot of fun. Get toasted, get drunk. There's a place called Tequila Sunrise. They had like a volleyball court upstairs. They had the strip clubs, all that. I mean, so it was wild. And, mostly college kids, kids our age, would just go down there and you just take free, you had free reign of that place. You weren't going to get in any trouble. The federales, the worst they would do is take you to the border and hand you over to the Americans. So, it's not like any of those kids were going to end up at a jail, in Mexico. So they kind of knew all the kids coming over from La Jolla would go down there and hang out, and obviously up the coast. So we did that pretty much every weekend for probably some 19 up to 20. And one night I was going there. So when I met my first wife, and I'd gone to Mexico with her. I'd met her through a friend of mine that was going, and started dating. We kind of moved in together, I think, within probably like 3 weeks. She had an apartment in Huntington Beach, and she had these two roommates who had cats that would just shit all over the house. And they were just really, not good people. And, so I started staying up there. I started staying up there a lot, and I noticed that they didn't respect her. And, that didn't make me happy because, this is my girlfriend now. So I would be pretty passive aggressive, actually. I'm probably sure I still am a little bit now, but I find humor in it. So, there's that. So what I would do is, their cat would shit all over the house. They wouldn't clean it up. So, and I picked it up and picked it up and picked it up, clean the carpet, keep doing it. But it kept happening. So I would take pieces of paper and I would just cut out a hole, put it over the pile of shit and said, "Don't you think you should pick this up?" And just left them wherever the cat shit was. Me and Jennifer go out to dinner the night I do this, and we come back and they're home and they're triggered. They are very triggered that these signs are on this cat shit. And so a big thing ensues and they're going to move out. So they move out and I move in. And we did, me and her had our, 25-year marriage, 2 kids. She kind of went down I brought her down that road with me, So me and her would take the psychedelics together, had tons of fun. Still one of the most amazing women I've ever met in my life. Still love her dearly. Yeah, really, truly. We're still fairly close. She only lives like 20 minutes that way. So, it's been a good thing to keep going. I think it's, there's just certain relationships in life that, you're not meant to be together. Like somehow you love each other so much, but it's like you have to do something. And this way, this collaboration of this life won't allow it, but it has to happen. And we fought that for a long time before it was like, what, this has to stop. Both of our lives have really taken off in really incredible directions for both of us since then. It just got locked into like a habitual cycle pattern, that just couldn't be escaped from. We had so we had our times with the psychedelics as well. I'm only going to take this, we're going to go a little bit longer. I just want to take this up to the point where, the teachers come in, and we'll continue with that. Because, I really want this history laid down. Because so you get an idea of who I am in this, or where I'm coming from, what my past has been. Not just a voice coming out of nowhere. So we did, the psychedelics together. We ate a lot of mushrooms together. And there was moments in that where, we're starting to take a lot. We had an apartment that we had rented in Laguna Hills, California. At this point, I'm 20 years old. And I decided I'm going to do this heroic dose. I'd been reading a lot of Terence McKenna at the time. And he had this book, Food of the Gods. And he talked about heroic doses. And I'm like, I just heard heroic dose. And to me, I'd already been taking, 5 to 7 grams of mushrooms at the time. And decided, well, I'm going to try eating an ounce. So I took a half ounce of mushrooms and put it in a pot of water and brewed it into a tea. Took the other half ounce of mushrooms and put them out in front of me. And then I sat there in my apartment. My wife was at work. And started to eat them and chase it with the tea. Eat the mushroom, chase it with the mushroom tea. It takes like 20 minutes to get through this. I mean, my stomach's just, the taste and everything is just keep going. I get to that last mushroom and that last gulp of tea, and I look at it, and I remember saying to myself, that might be too much. After consuming the whole thing, I just put it in my mouth, chewed it, drank the tea, turned around to lay down on the couch. No longer did it take that I laid down on the couch, and now I'm standing up. And it happened just like that. I just stood up. And I remember looking at this energy form with this really kind of gross material energy form kind of embedded in it. And I'm looking at it, and I hear this voice in my ear. And it says, are you gonna stare at your meat suit all day, or are we gonna do something? I'm like, what? It's like, what am I looking at? That's your body. You're looking at your body. And I look over, and there's a guy standing here. Of course, this is 28 grams of mushrooms. There's a guy standing here, he's blue. Another guy standing over here, he's blue as well. Got long hair. I mean, human features, but they're blue. Right? And they looked at me and said, would you let us take you somewhere? I just kind of acquiesced. I didn't know what else to do. And they put their arms under, my armpits, although my body's on the ground, but I could clearly feel the sensation of someone lifting me up from like here. And we go up to the ceiling. I go through all this fractal, and all of a sudden I can see the sky, right? And I'm kind of just floating there, being hung, just kind of hanging there. I'm watching the sky undulate, and these little ladders dropping out that look like double helix. Like what they say when you get the image of DNA, like a spiral staircase strand. We're dropping out, right? I'm looking at them, and it's like you could travel them. And this happened a few times. Sky would undulate, different holes would open up with different ladders. Then they would dissolve, and then the sky would undulate again. There'd be other ones. And it was like these two guys, two blue guys, are watching, looking for a particular thing. And all of a sudden the sky undulates, one drops out, and they start moving towards it, and I'm getting pulled along with them. And it was like going up like a spiral, like this. And I poked my head up through it, and there they are standing. It's not like there was a floor, but some kind of foundation. They were standing on it, and they grabbed me by my armpits and just pulled me up into it. They just throw me up in the air, and then for the next, I don't know, human time, next 7 hours, I laid in this dome. It was like a big dome coming down like this. It's a big bright light at the top, and there's all these strange shapes, like sacred geometry, but even stranger than that. Colors that were vibrant and not really a name for, like hues of blues we don't have names for, hues of oranges. And it was just this whole lit up kind of thing. And I could float in it, and I could float up to that light, but I couldn't get beyond it. It was like that was the ceiling. But I could float all like this in it. And these shapes would pop out of the wall three-dimensionally and hover over me and spin. And as they were spinning, there'd be like beams of light hitting me. And I would hear things in my head, and I would feel these energies, like a presence, like, after 7 hours of that, I sat up on my couch, completely stone cold sober, not hungover, not, in the after effects of all that, just stone cold sober, and was completely blown away. For the next few months after that, I didn't sleep very much. I definitely can see now that, I entered a manic state, very much so. My wife, bless her heart at the time, my ex-wife handled it with grace because I was all over the map. I would just have these things go on where the phone would ring, I'd know who it was. So I'd just pick it up and, if it was like, say it was my friend Steve. Hey, Steve, how's it going? She's like, how'd you know it was me? It's like, I just know. Someone would knock on the door, and I'd look at my wife and say, well, it's so-and-so. She'd open the door, and that's who it was. Not calling before they come over. I'd be at the grocery store, and it was like I would hear her say, shit, I forgot to put this on the grocery list. So I'd go grab the object, come home. She's like, how'd you know to get that? So I heard you. And she just kind of looked at me like, huh? There was one night we were driving, going up to her parents' house in Fountain Valley, which was up Interstate 5 a bit. LA freeways are pretty big. And there's on-ramps coming on. We all know what an on-ramp is. But we're coming onto it, and Jennifer's driving, and I'm the passenger. And we're getting onto the on-ramp, and I feel suddenly someone tapping me on my shoulder from the back seat. And I turn my head to see this guy out of control, probably doing 110, but going sideways, coming right at us. And I told her, hey, you need to move over. So she moves over, and the car goes by us. It doesn't slam into us. And she just kind of looked over at me and said, there was someone in the back seat that tapped on me and told me to look. She's like, you kind of gave me this funny look. I think it freaked her out a little bit. That, what is going on with you? Plus, just this rambling of esoteric stuff, just on and on and on and on and on. And on. Kind of like I talk on and on. But, so that kind of kicked me into this place where it was like a deeper introspection. One night, no mushrooms, didn't eat the mushrooms. There were some people in the house I had. And we're in Jen's parents' house. It's my ex-wife's name. They were out of town. We were house sitting, and I laid in the bedroom that we used to stay in. In between houses, we would stay at our parents' house, and the room we were staying. Looking up, and the entire room suddenly is gone, and I'm staring into what I could only really call infinity. It was like this eternal infiniteness. And it was just filled with this web that just kind of went everywhere, all over the place. And it had these little filaments. So there wasn't a space that wasn't connected because the filaments kind of connected it. And where two filaments would come together, any space in between would be illuminated. So it was like this massively, completely connected, but looked like a web. And I'm seeing this thing just kind of take over the room. And I'm watching it. And I look over at the people in the room. I'm like, do you see that? Do you guys see that? And they're, see what? So I realize they're not seeing it, only me. So I'm watching this, and all of a sudden, this brilliant point of light is going across these filaments, these little fibers, traveling around and around and around. And it would stop in front of me. Then it would get big. And as it got big, the light would get dimmer, but it would take up more of the web. And if it got small, it would get super brilliant. It just kept doing this. It would get super brilliant, and it would shoot a beam of light. It would, like, one hit me in the third eye, forehead, and one would hit me in the solar plexus. And it was like I got lifted out of the bed. And I felt, what would I call it? Holy, sacred, I don't know, whatever word you want to give that. Presence, like me and the universe, whatever you want to call it. I don't want to get into all that weird verbology because it's bullshit anyway. But presence, a divine presence, I'll just say that. Within, without, all around, enveloped in it, consciousness was definitely elevated. And every time it would get small, it would shoot those beams, and as it would start to go back to being big, I'd hear this thing say, God is love, God is love, God is love. I'm like, what is that? You know, it just kept happening in these waves of just love, really. Just keep coming at me. And, you know, I'm just ecstatic. So and it's, I mean, as profound as anything I experienced on, you know, the years of, and multitude of psychedelics I had taken by that point. Beyond that, with no psychedelics involved at all. So I go home. You know, her parents the next morning come home and we go back to our apartment. My ex-wife goes off to work. And I'm sitting there, and because it was that profound. I mean, I had felt states of bliss in doing the psychedelic journeying. I definitely felt states of euphoria, even joy to a point. But I never felt that presence, that it was like, yeah, God is love. Woo, it was like that, just so intense. So, you know, it really blew me away, and I was really, really trying to dive into it. So I'm sitting on the couch. I'm thinking about it, and this thought comes in. A thought, you know, from an old behavior of mine, from a habit that wasn't dead yet. Saying, you know, maybe you just did all those drugs. You just, you know, that's just, you're having a flashback, and that's just what that was. You know, and you were just mesmerized by it. I'm sitting thinking all this. And while I'm thinking that, all of a sudden, it was like a bouquet of roses was shoved into my face. I'm like, I'm smelling them immediately. I mean, what the fuck is this? I go looking around the apartment for roses. I'm looking at, I mean, you know, I looked foolish. I know that, because I was looking in the closet. I looked in the freezer, the fridge, underneath the cabinets, because it was in my face. It had to be coming from somewhere. I went and, you know, the neighbor's door of our apartment was right next to ours. It was like a staircase and two apartments, one over here and one over here. So our neighbor's door was right there. I opened the door and I was smelling their door to see if it was coming from there. And, you know, and I'm walking around the house. It's not coming from anywhere. It's just in my face. So I'm walking across my living room, and a Bible flies off the shelf, across the room, lands open. The hair on the back of my neck is standing up immediately. I'm like, oh, whoa, 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 whoa. Because it literally went across the room and landed open. So I walk over to it, and I go to pick it up, and, you know, I scoop it up, and my thumb is on the text. My hand is on the cover, so I'm just picking it up to fold it, put it back on the shelf. And I pick it up. Here's a voice say, you know, read it. And I read where my thumb is. It says, God is love. I'm like, okay, this is kind of weird. You know, there's no one else there. It's just me. You know, and I'm kind of like, okay, what's going on here? So I just kind of flip it, point. It says God is love again. It says it 4 or 5 times in there. I think I found them all. And I just got this rush in me. It's like, okay, something is happening here that I don't really know what it is. So I just shut the Bible, put it back on the shelf, and I went and I sat down. And then it was like the whole apartment was taken over by a presence of some kind. It felt divine. It felt, the energy I got from it, what I was feeling was like heaven. That it was like my soul said, this is what heaven feels like. This is what heaven feels like. This is what it feels like in heaven. It was incredible. Astounding. I mean, all the adjectives you can come up with that amount to that, they all apply. The colors, the vividness, the wisdom, I could just feel it in my face. You know, I could just feel presence of life like I'd never known before. And it felt divine. It felt clean. It felt pure. All those things. And I remember seeing, like, not a person, but like a face, but not a person, like a presence that kind of personified, kind of, but not really perfectly. You know, it's not like seeing somebody, but, you know, like a fractal, but a face, definitely. And it looked right at me, and it said, this is where you're intended to go. This will be your home. And I'm feeling it. It's just amazing. You know, I'm weeping. It's just heaven. And then it says, but you have to start from where you are. You don't just get to have this. We can show you this, but you can't have this. You have to work for this. You have to do this willingly. Can't be given to you. So you have to start from where you are. And I remember suddenly that face gets foggy. And I'm feeling the states of consciousness drop, 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 down, 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 down. I can't see it anymore. It's fading. The memory of it, although I want to grab onto it and run with it forever, is fading. It's fading. It's fading. That presence is fading. All of my doubts and fears. I can just feel like all that shit rushing back in. And it's like, and visually, just to put it in a way that you might understand it, visually it was as if, okay, I see the ground. That's probably where I start from because that's the bottom. But it was like a meteor. No, into the ground and embedded in it. Embedded into the earth. It's like, Jesus. And I look up and it's like it's just flashing out there. That state I was in. I mean, distance, the distance is, in your will. How willing you are, your presence. Yeah, that's the distance. It's not across a galaxy. But I could just see how far away consciously I was from that state. And it just dawned on me that there's no way in hell I'm ever going to make it there. It's so far away from where this is. And then I went into, I guess I'd call it, it might look like a nervous breakdown, but it was really a weeping from the soul. And I sat there pretty much for a few days, probably dehydrated from just sobbing, just sobbing away for days. Feeling really a lot of remorse, for things I didn't even understand. Just feelings in me that I just felt remorse for, that it was like, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I kept saying that over again. Not to anyone in particular, just to this kind of looming thing. I didn't even know what it was. And went through that for about 3 days. And it kind of occurred to me, you can't live in Southern California anymore. It's time for you to move on. So I told my wife, I can't be here anymore. I can't be in this lifestyle. I can't be in this confusion. I can't be in this crazy, fast-paced life. I need some time to just settle down somewhere. And so took out a map, just put my hand on my eyes, went like this. Landed on Woodland Park, Colorado. We moved there a couple months later, which is where I met Fire Dancer from the beginning of the podcast. She ran the house with all the medicine men. And that's where I met all them. That's where, that happened. Meeting Carlos, that was when I was 25 years old. Met him on a dirt road on my birthday out here in Colorado. Yeah, I just want to speak to this for just a couple minutes because, I know what I'm going to get. I already know. I've been doing this for a long time. Doing speaking engagements for the better part of 20-some years. Not out in the world so much, kind of locally in different spots where, I know people who want to put something like that on. But I've caught a lot of flack. You didn't know Carlos. Carlos was this. What you're going to read on the internet is Carlos, had some harem. He was some kind of sex fiend. Yeah. I looked into it for about a year after he died, and it's like, none of these people have any proof of anything. They just got stories, and what proof there is seems convoluted and kind of cheesy, really. There were some videos that came out of 3 women who said they spent time with him, and I watched them, and not the kind of caliber of a Carlos type, He didn't become public. I understand why. Actually, now that I'm in my 50s, I completely understand why he stayed out of the public eye. Because there's a lot of people in the world who think they understand what that deeper teaching, that deeper learning, that deeper connection to life force is about. And, it's all fluffy, love and lighty. It's not that at all. the recognition you're in a predatory universe, and since humans don't need to necessarily go hunt food and act out their predatory instincts, they haven't really gotten rid of that yet. Haven't figured out a way to transform or transcend that into something, more aligned with where we might be going as a species. So it's turned into competition. So in the medicine community, the medicine world, the ayahuasca world, the plant medicine world, and the new age world, it is a convoluted mess. And anything that's gotten big like that, that group think is there. And mob mentality rules and that kind of grouping of all that. It just does. It bugs me. I can't stand it. It drives me nuts. Just all this new age crap. 25-year-old shamans running around, 20-year-old life coaches. It's like, what is going on here? And really, what are you achieving at all? That element was still there, that love and lighty. We're not really looking at anything other than what makes us feel good. We're going to get together and cuddle, puddle, and, do all of our cute little things. But we're not going to address anything. There's going to be an elephant in that room, and we're just going to worship it instead of kill it. So we're not going to ever address any awkwardness, and that, the few people I met with Carlos that were famous at the time, probably, I don't know if they are anymore. I don't really pay attention to any of that, but yeah, meeting them with Carlos, wow, that's a story. That's quite a story. So I had spent time when I was 23, with a man by the name of Joseph Heigl. He was a Lakota medicine man, very old. He was in his 90s. I had, at this time I was meeting a lot of elders, learning, medicine wheel techniques, sacred pipe ceremony, sweat lodges, doing vision quests, doing warrior walks, this kind of thing, being a guardian for what was called the Council of the Grandmothers. So it's the feminine, strong women coming out of the tribes. And each tribe kind of put up a couple of grandmothers, and we were guardians for one of them, me and a couple other guys. So when they would go to their meetings, we'd drive them, we'd stand behind them. You don't mess with her. You don't mess with her, kind of thing. And the women were actually meaner than the men. As far as I know, well, meaner is probably not the word. More stern, more quick to call you out, more quick to embarrass you in front of everybody. I remember there was a woman that would come in, young, and she was often lived on the Navajo res, and just gorgeous and present. And I was looking at her coming in the door, and the grandmother I was guarding smacks me in the face. So you put your eyes in the back of your head, and said it so loud that everybody looked at me, and I just kind of had to look down and, blushing as that girl's staring at me. It's pretty funny. It was pretty funny. And, there was a group of people around that would come in, just people of your past, no one really significant for, what anyone else needs to know. It's not like it's interesting. But there were some things that were going on. And I remember that there was a group of people coming down, and they were going to do this so-called ceremony in Mesa Verde, which is Anasazi ruins, down in the Four Corners of Colorado, between Mancos and Cortez. It's a national park. It has the ruins, cliff dwellings, pits, kiva pits, prayer pits, that kind of thing. And they had come down, and one of them had known Twyla, which was Joseph Heigl's wife at the time, and when he was old. And they were going to do this ceremony where they were going to open some portals in a sun temple. And, it was a group that I was running around with. And, they had this whole procedure they were going to do. And I was going to do it with them. And he looks at me, Joseph looks at me and says, "You going to really go do that?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm going to go." He's like, "They're just playing." I'm like, I'm just go hang out. So I go up there, and I watch this thing go down. Right. We're all supposed to have our eyes closed, and these things are going on. You're supposed to bring this color into your mind, and this whole thing going on. And I had my eyes open. I know I probably shouldn't have, but I did. And I'm watching what this guy's doing. He's got these two crystals in his hand. And all of a sudden, everybody hears him shatter and they go, ooh, what I saw was him breaking them. And I kind of went, okay, just kind of played along with it. It was awkward, but okay. Just went through the whole thing, listening to all the stories. And it's just something about it made me realize that, there's kind of a game going on here. Went back to Joseph's, ended up going down there a lot after that and spending a lot of time with him up until the point where, he passed away. He used to sit in his chair. Like, Joseph? He wouldn't answer you. Just, Joseph, not breathing. He'd walk up, take his pulse, and he would just look at you. I'm just practicing dying. Just leave me alone. I'm practicing dying. It's like, okay, Well, eventually he did. And that group kind of came apart. I mean, it kind of just wasn't my thing anymore. For me, it was like a serious thing beyond all this kind of game story that was going on. That I saw developing, and I wasn't really into that. So I pretty much hung it up. Me and my wife ended up in our own place. I took on a couple of roommates, and I wasn't really doing anything. I mean, I was still doing my own thing, but I wasn't mingling in any groups. I was done with all that. Yeah, pretty much done. Thinking, that was a neat little ride. I'm going to get a career and become a responsible person, get a real job. Do the thing, get the insurance. Live the life. Because it's interesting throughout my life that always comes up. It's like, God, it would just be so much easier to get a job with insurance and a 401k, and it just never really worked out. Just my soul just won't let it happen. I'm okay with it now. I mean, it's been a rough life because of it, but it seems to be balancing itself out as I get older, which is nice. I mean, I'm not one who wants much. I want some free time. I want to be able to exist and breathe, take care of my needs, take care of the people around me, help where I can, get some hard work done, make sure, I take care of myself. So there's not a whole lot there. But, so I was kind of leaning more towards going back into that kind of a life. And, there was a couple things that happened there. I mean, I definitely, the thing I would say in that time that I had developed quite an idea of myself. A lot of the elders that came through during those times took a special interest in me. Most of them, actually. And I always, what I learned was profound, but I always let it go to my head like, they'd be, oh, Cristobal, you come with us, So there'd be like a group of people, and one night, in particular, there's a group of people sitting there. There's all the native elders that had come off of Pine Ridge and the reservations around South Dakota, North Dakota, northern Nebraska. And they're all sitting there, and you got all their underlings and all the people coming in for a ceremony, watching all this. So there's a bunch of people around. And they look at me and they're like, Christopher, why don't you come and smoke the pipe with us? And I looked at him and I said, well, that's okay. I don't need to smoke the pipe. They said, oh, what do you mean you don't need to smoke the pipe? And I said, well, you smoke the pipe and your prayers rise on the smoke. And they said, uh-huh. And I said, well, I am the pipe and my thoughts are my prayers. And they just started giggling and laughing and going, you're a white chocolate covered cherry. And they took me in even deeper. So I got to learn things that, the others wouldn't. I get taken off, just me and a couple of the elders, and everybody's kind of like, why don't we get to go? And, I really did let that go to my head quite a bit. And then there was a couple men from Europe that had come over. I still to this day, it's like, how in the hell did I meet them? It's kind of one of those things where it was just happenstance, just kind of happened out of nowhere. But anyway, they would come to the house, we would sit and talk, and, by this time, I had done a ton of psychedelics. I had spent some time with some medicine men by this time. There was definitely this thing that, I felt like I could exude something. So I would try it out on people. And on these two guys, it worked like a charm. And they were like, wow. They started, you're the reincarnation of Maharaji. I'm just like, oh, geez, I don't even know who that is. they were talking about build a temple and this whole thing. And it went on for, I don't know, a couple of weeks, and then they went away. But during the time, it was like, talk about, getting a polishing on your identity and on your image and on your ego. And I kind of lived with that and became kind of like, I would say an abhorrent leader type. I definitely had some skill. I could definitely talk people into things. Definitely had that ability. And, the intentions were good, because just you got to see this mystery called life. But I noticed that I would bend it to my own advantage. I would bend it to, serve me. And that, I would, what do they call it now? Spiritual bypassing. Well, back then we just called it, you're hiding your shit. You got shit in you that runs counter to what you're saying. And, so I was good at hiding that. I was very good at hiding that. And prided myself on that. And so, I'm out of it. I'm not doing it anymore. 25th birthday rolls around. Me and the ex-wife are driving down this dirt road. And we come around this corner, and there's a little red Honda from California sitting there. California plates. And his hand comes out the window, trying to flag us down. So, I pull up behind him. I figure their car's broken down. I get out. I walk up to the car. And Carlos, I didn't know that at the time, this man jumps out of the car. We'll put a picture up, it'll be somewhere soon. Because like I said, this is the first podcast. We're going to keep going, but, I'll get a picture of him up. But this looked like Incan, looked like he stepped out of 3,000 years ago, really. Jumps out of the car and just starts shaking my hand. It's nice to meet you. It's nice to finally meet you. I'm like, what the hell is going on? It was buzzing in my head. It's like I was in another world for a moment. When Carlos wrote about the way Don Juan looked at him in the bus stop, that just froze him. It was like, a different flavor of that, a different mood of that, but it was definitely that. I was just mesmerized. For one, here's this guy that looks like he stepped out of an Indian movie. Yeah. Like, just the classic look of an Indian. And he's shaking my hand, telling me it's nice to finally meet you. I don't have any idea who this guy is. And then I said, so, do you need some help? He's like, yeah, I'm trying to get to this guy Dan's house. I'm like, oh, Dan, it was a friend of mine. I'm like, Dan Pedro? He's like, yeah. Dan's going to let us stay at his house tonight. And he had with him this woman and a kid. And the woman's name was Sisu. And the kid's name was Markale. And so they were, I don't know. At the time, I didn't know why they were with him. But, that was the scene. I didn't know who he was. And he said, well, can you tell me, because I tried to find their house, I'm getting lost. So I gave him directions on how to get to Dan's house. And we go driving down the road. I get back as soon as, no sooner does that happen, he gets in the car and he's gone, driving down the road. So I walk back to the Bronco. That's the car me and my ex-wife had at the time. And I get in, she looks at me, she goes, what was that? I'm like, it was weird. It just dawned on me. I'm like, I think that might have been Carlos Castaneda. She's like, what? The writer? I'm like, yeah, I think so. She said, what makes you think that? I'm like, I don't really know. For some reason, I just think that's who that was. So, me and Dan's birthdays were just a few days apart. We were dear friends. Our lives were running parallel. We were kind of living the same stories. The stories he would tell me of his childhood, teenage years were the same as mine. It was like we thought on the same level, that we could connect real easily. So he was a dear friend of mine, comrade, really. A brother in arms, a warrior in arms. And so our birthdays were pretty close together. What I hadn't known is, the two wives, my wife and Dan's, basically his wife. They'd been together long enough to see it. Yeah, it was his wife. Her name was Lori. That they were putting a gathering together at Dan and Lori's place, which at the time they were living in a trailer on a property they had bought for the summer. And so we go out there for this birthday party for me and Dan. There's other people there, and Carlos is there. And he comes walking up to me, and the first thing he says to me is like, man, your directions were horrible. You led me out on all over these dirt roads back here. He's like, it took me an hour to find this place, and I had to find it on my own. I'm just like, I'm sorry, you know. And he sticks his hand down. He's like, my name is Carlos Castaneda. It's nice to meet you. And it was confirmed. In order to really get you to understand, the wave that hit me was a freight train. There I was standing in front of, you know, as far as I'm concerned, the one who, you know, if the work is taken seriously, is probably one of the deepest, one of the most profound, pragmatic, and potent approaches to undoing what's damaging humans. It's ruthless, for sure. It takes a warrior with no pity, for sure. It takes reducing self-importance, not afraid of being embarrassed, thrown in situations you don't think you can handle over and over and over and over again. And, you know, maybe in some other universes as well, but right here in your physical life. That was a potent thing for me. Because throughout my years of psychedelic use from a child up to this point, I felt like I was in touch with the spiritual realm, if you will. My uncle died when I was a child. Everybody in the house is crying because, you know, uncle died. And he was the favorite of the family. I mean, this guy was amazing. Just a beautiful soul. And yeah, and, you know, he was just the light of the family on, you know, for mine and my sisters, my mom and my dad. And then my mom's side of the family, yeah, that was like this bright, brilliant spot in it. And, you know, you could feel that even as a kid. I wasn't that old, but I could feel that, you know, that presence of him. And I really admired him. I really looked up to him. I always thought I wanted to be like him when I grew up. And he had caught a rare form of cancer. Took him over pretty quick. I didn't really understand what was going on, you know. As a kid, you know, what's happening? And then he had passed away. He was young. He was in his 20s, early 20s. It devastated my mother, devastated his parents, devastated the family, really, everybody. And I remember my mom coming home and telling us the news, and you just see everybody, you know, you just see instantly the grief, and you feel the grief, and I can see it happening. And it was interesting because I didn't feel grief. It felt wonderful. I'm like, what is happening? It's like I know what I should be feeling to some degree, even at that age, but it was something else. And I remember looking across the living room, and there's my uncle standing in the living room. I can see him as clear as day. You know, luminescent, still him, a younger, healthier version, you know, not like cancer destroyed look. Healthy, but just glowing. And he looked at me and said, you know, somebody said to me, which, you know, that cliche stuff, but it's not really what he says. It's what you feel, you know, which kind of gave me like, I think, an extra oomph. That there is more to this than what people are saying. There's definitely more to this life than what people are saying. You know, my grandfather passed away, my mom's dad, which, now that's the man that I looked up to growing up. I mean, he was the king of my world, as far as I knew. He was slick. People liked him. He was well known. He had TV commercials, so I saw him on the TV. I mean, there was just all the elements that made you go, wow, this guy is awesome. That was my grandfather. Really caring, really cool. Loved him dearly. Wise as can be. You know, really just a brilliant, beautiful guy. And, you know, so after he passed away, I remember my mom calling me to tell me, right? And I wake up in the morning, my mom calls me, she says, I have news. I said, yeah, I know. She's like, what? I said, Grandpa passed away. She said, well, how do you know that? I said, Mom, because he's sitting across the table from me right now. And he was. And we were having this deep exchange. And she got quiet. She's like, you know, Chris, I don't really need to hear this right now. You know, my father just passed, you know, I don't need to hear all your crap right now, kind of thing. Because, you know, I was off the rails at times, my parents, and I was like, where are you going with all this spirit shit. Yeah, yeah. It was kind of. It's like what I see today with all the, little boys in tights changing their names, running around trying to get laid, calling it being in the higher chakras. That maybe not quite as ridiculous as what I'm seeing, but today, but ridiculous enough for the time. And I said to my mom, I'm like, Mom, Grandpa wants me to tell you that after you deal with hospice, because you got to deal with hospice and the body and the corpse. After you're done with that and you leave that hospital tonight, it was Ohio. It's winter, so it's cold. I said, you're going to feel a warm breeze against your face. And that's Grandpa kissing you goodbye. And she told me, not right away, but a couple of years later, she said, that's what happened. And a warm breeze came out and did that. So that whole thing went down. And then when her mother died, my grandma, she had a daughter as well, my Aunt Susie, who lived on the East Coast. I think she was living on the East Coast or the West Coast, one of them. She bounced around a lot. She loved to travel. Not spend, like a vagabond, but just building her life in different places, doing it really well. And so my grandma's, dying. You can kind of see the transition happening, where the deep breathing. And I got a moment alone with her, and I'm sitting there with my grandma. I'm holding her hand. Her body's laying down, but suddenly it was like she sat up and looked at me, and I had this conversation with her. I don't know if anybody poked their head in and noticed it, but, we had this conversation. I came, and after we were done, my mom's like, oh, I just hope she holds on until Susie gets here. I said, yeah, she's going to hold on until Susie gets here. She's not going to die until she gets here, so don't worry about it. My Aunt Susie shows up, gets her time alone, and my grandma passed away shortly thereafter. So that part of life I've always had, what I feel pretty interesting access to. And yeah, it did go to my head. There's all kinds of things you can use there. You can entice people, you can mesmerize them, you can make them think you're all these things. And I played that as a kid for sure. What I didn't have nailed down is how the hell do you live on this planet? With how heavy it is and how crazy it is and how hard it is. Like, I could not find my groove in the working, having a house and all the that crushed me. I had a hard time figuring out how to live on this planet without letting my life force get to the point where I just don't want to be here anymore and it sucks. I hate it here. I want to leave. I had a lot of that. Just take me off this planet. I don't want to be here. I don't want to be here. I was born at the wrong time. All those things. And it was Carlos, so abusing that kind of more spiritually charged kind of jargon and character at the time, backing it with some energy, obvious, definitely. I would use that, just to cover up all this dark shit, so I would just have more fun. And it gets out of hand because your dark shit kind of creeps into the things you're trying to be lied about and be real and astute about. It always finds its way in and messes with it and terrorizes it and destroys it. Yeah. So, a lot of that going on. And then, and after meeting Carlos, I remember sitting there with him on the side of the hill. This was like maybe a week into hanging out with him. And we, from the day I met him, and it was nonstop, waking, sleep, all day long with him. Pretty much for 2 years, every day, every single day. There were times where he'd go away for a little bit because I couldn't handle it, and he knew it, that, that's too much. Just Cristobal needs to take a breather because being around Carlos was tough because this is a guy who's not holding back his energetic presence like we all do to make people feel comfortable, to be polite, so they don't trigger somebody. No, he loved triggering people. Just by his presence, he could trigger people. It was crazy to watch. It was crazy to be a part of and try to manage yourself and all that while people are looking at you as well. So, it was really tough. But I remember sitting on a hillside with him. And we're sitting there, and he's telling me about my past. He had a real keen way of doing that. Like he's reading my thoughts. It was like he could read my history like it was a book. He's like, yeah, and he would start talking to me about the people from Europe and, telling me I was the reincarnation of Maharaj. I was like, yeah, you've had a lot of bright things go on. You've got a lot of adoration. You've gotten a lot of, real attention from people. That's really good. You really got that down. He's like, but what about this, Cristobal? And I just felt this buzz in my head, and it was like I was kind of medicated feeling. And he just kind of pointed his eyes over towards the bushes, and like, kind of coaxing me to look over there. And I look over, and I see a crypt. This is Carlos' sense of humor. I see this crypt sitting there. And I'm like, what is that? And he's like, Cristobal, look. And it says Pandora's box, right? And I look over. He's like, look again. And I look. Now it says Cristobal's box. And I just feel all this like shame, fear, doubt, remorse, all the crappy things I've done, all the shit I thought I got away with, all just, It's like he walks over to it and just starts pushing the lid off. Yeah. And the visual that, would make probably the most sense to understand where I was at in it. Like 1,000 demons came flying out of that crypt, and they were all thoughts in my head. I'm like, Carlos, you got to stop that. I felt like I was coming apart. You got to stop that. He's like, no, Cristobal. I know that you are good at that. You need to be good at this. And, spent the next 2 years with him dealing with some of the darkest aspects of my behavior, the darkest aspects of fear, of unknown, of, the stuff that cripples us. Stuff that makes us run to pop culture and movies and TikTok. Yeah, that, it's like that deep existential fear that you really want to solve that problem, but you don't really know what it is, so you can't articulate it well enough to get any help for it. That thing. And it's a thing. Yeah, it's definitely got a mind of its own. It's got a volition of its own. I wouldn't say it has a life of its own, but a volition. That's 2 years of learning about that. It wasn't over then. After he passed away, it had to go take about a year to crash and burn like I've never crashed and burned before. I remember calling a friend of mine who will be on this podcast. He's 77, and he was there for me at a time when no one could be. When a guy like Carlos passes away, he's basically taking you from the world of career and education and rationality. Not that those things go away. They're just not relied on for everything. There's other things in life that point you in a direction that ration and reason can't even see, but are super important. That rationality and reason can't see the importance of, to navigate that. It can be really tough, so learning these skills from him, and then going to ash, basically, just crashing and burning. My friend Chip says to me, well, Cristobal, sometimes you just got to go to ash. I'm like, well, what am I going to do? He's like, well, since you don't really know what to do, since Carlos has passed away, move to Dolores, spend a couple of years here, and just put yourself back together. So that's what I did. Moved into a, very much an impoverished situation. I mean, the four corners of the United States is not a place you go to make a living. That's for damn sure. So you're scratching by, lived in a mobile home, lived in a house that was just, looks like it was about to fall down. One of them had a dirt floor in the kitchen because the tile had worn away. And dirt was coming up, so he just threw a big rug over it. So did a lot of poverty, a lot of coming to ash, and it was interesting because a lot of understanding that what I'm doing, what my life had brought me to that point wasn't to be messed with like a game of roulette. It was not to be taken as a game of chance. It was not to be taken as a grand adventure where I can do whatever I want. Freedom. I'm a sovereign being and I can do whatever the hell I want. No. What mine was more like, there's rules to this game called life. In order for me to really feel the presence of this life, There are rules. And I needed to learn those. And after Carlos passed away, I realized what he was showing me was the ropes, the rules, the laws of being alive as a physical being in a universe. And, lucky him, he didn't have it as rough as we do. We got trolls on Facebook. We have haters. We have people who will lie about us. Have people go, oh, they have a cult up there and their core followers. Like, nobody up here talks like that. No one around here talks like that. I'm as much a white kid from the suburbs as I've ever been. My upbringing, white in Omaha, Nebraska, you were doing the Christian thing. So you're, not that my parents were all that religious, although my mom did have a stint in it. And, her Christianity took off from there. Hers is much different than what the mainstream is, that's for sure, because she lives like a warrior. Definitely. So it's a different take than, going to some, what you see in your standard church. And, I was brought up in that. And we'll talk about that deeper in the podcast because there's a lot of stuff, a lot of juice in here. But, I was into Christianity. And to me, what I saw was, it shows you a good way to behave in the world. It kind of points the law out without, really, is it the Ten Commandments? No. It's the way you carry yourself in the world. So after Carlos passed away, it was really important for me to dial that in. As Don Juan said, live with impeccability. Live with heart, live with presence, live with life force, store personal power. Don't lose your marbles. Have guts of steel. And Carlos, passed away when I was 27. So that's 25 years ago. I never stopped. I never gave up. I've continued. It's not been a popular thing up until now. The plants we were doing back in the days, man, we were looked at as drug addicts, irresponsible little kids. You're doing mushrooms. What are you doing with those things? Now I'm hearing, did you know that mushrooms cure depression? Yeah, I knew that like 30 years ago. Truly knew that 30 years ago. Tried to tell people that. Not publicly, so it's like there's a whole lot of proof to that. But I tried to tell, no, this helps you. This helps you. This helps you. Did a lot of trip sitting for friends throughout my 20s. Anytime I would be doing these things with people and they were losing it, it was like I just knew exactly how to help them. I knew exactly what to say to bring them home, to get them to get the wisdom that was trying to come through so they didn't crack under their inability to remove the confusion, to see the clarity of what was happening. Carlos, in that time I spent with him, we didn't take plants. I remember, going up on the Volvo, I used to drive Don Juan around and it was parked out at these people's house, out here. And it was the car he drove Don Juan around in. I remember, I want to go sit in the passenger seat, because I know Don Juan used to sit there. Ooh, feeling, that magical idea of, oh, maybe I could pick up on some of Don Juan from a car seat, which, yeah, that's magical thinking. That doesn't work so well. It doesn't have anything to do with the actual energetic process of anything. Carl's like, and he even said that to me. He's like, do you really think you're going to pick up on the wisdom of Don Juan by sitting in that seat? He'd love to tell me, you're just a child, Cristobal. You're not even out of diapers yet. Quit trying to be 80. Quit trying to be so sensitive. It was funny. Just kind of rousted me like that a lot. But that trunk of that car had a peyote buttons, just big old boxes of them. I remember, seeing it, and I went to put my hand in it, and he just like, no, Cristobal, and he shuts the lid. It's like, you've done enough of that already. He's like, and besides, you need to save some space because you got some of that coming in your future. But right now, I need you to not do the plants so you can understand that all these things that you're experiencing with the plants, it isn't the plants. And it's not the responsibility of the plants to carry what those plants show you. It's yours. So you'll dive back into those when you truly want to know how to live in the right way on this planet. And we didn't do plants. Not one button of peyote, not one toke, a little smoke, not a mushroom. Matter of fact, there was about 6 months into it, 7 months into it. Spending time with him, we're all camping on this land because he wouldn't let you live indoors in the summer. You had to live outside. So we, go camp on friends' land, 10, 15 acres up against the national forest. There's a well, there's an outhouse, but chop wood, carry water, basically. And, we would live out on the land that way, and he would make you do that for the summers. But anyway, one day some friend of mine had given me some mushrooms, just a little bit. And I really wanted to do them because, I just wanted to see, woo. And so I take my dog and I tell Carlos I'm going out for a hike, and I go out for a hike. I eat those mushrooms. Had the worst day of my life. It was horrible. Definitely should not have done that. That was probably the worst time ever. I did it against the rules. And, against what my word was. And it scrambled my brains. I had a headache, a migraine going on. Just these little monkey demon-like figures just messing with me. It just wasn't pleasant. I got nothing out of it. As a matter of fact, I felt like I got knocked down and took a few steps backwards. And it just wouldn't wear off. It just kept going and going. And I was waiting to get sober enough to go home, back to the camp. It's getting nighttime. Finally, I just dragged myself back and I come walking into the camp, and there's Carlos standing there right at the path I'm coming down, just right at the camp, just standing at the edge, watching me come down the path, just shaking his head. He's like, "How are you doing, Cristobal?" I'm like, "I'm all right." He looks at me, and this was one of the things he used to say to me all the time. He looks at me, he's like, "Cristobal, you do that again, we're not friends anymore." And I knew what he meant. He's like, what we're doing is important. You can't be doing that. And when you're young, you don't realize the importance. I did not realize the importance of what we were doing. I didn't realize the importance of the experiences I was having or just having them. It was just storing up. The reason I kind of kept a low profile in speaking about any of this, there's some of it on YouTube, but it's not like it has 10 million views. It's got a couple hundred. So it's not like I promoted any of this, because I really wanted to nail down the core essence of what this is before I go talking about it. So I don't have to stick my foot in my mouth. So I'm going to stop there, and then we'll, the next one, bring you up to speed. And, we're going to have guests. I have guests lined up, interesting people from my past, people I've met in doing some other work, some people from Peru. Some ayahuasqueros that I know, they'll be on the show. Curanderos that I work with down in Peru, they'll be coming up. I got a few elders that are still around. They're hard to understand because they're old, but, we can get them on there. I got friends doing some very interesting things I'd like to bring on just because, I know them and I watch their integrity. I watch how they are with community. I know they know what community means. I know they understand that tribe is a dangerous thing, but community is not. Tribe doesn't really tell the truth to where community is like, yo, take care of your dog. So to me, tribe is a lack of responsibility. Community is having full responsibility for your actions in it and what you bring. So, because I know that's a big thing. Everybody wants to buy some land, build a community. I've been doing this with me and my ex-wife did it. Me and Angela have done it. We're kind of doing it still now. I've been doing community for, since I was 20 years old. And 15 people living in a house. And I have seen how people want to take that into a cult, turn it into some shit. Never let it happen. Just always got rid of those people. Or the ones that come in and want to own it, tell you how you're behaving so horribly, while they're just taking advantage of you doing nothing. I've been through all of it. The New Age community, the woke, all that, just whatever that crap is, it's really hard to handle. And there's some people that are actually doing a pretty good job at it. Basically dealing with the chaos of people with intentions that aren't quite clear. Let's just say that. And I have some friends that are doctors. do some incredible work, have helped me do incredible work. Trainers that are coming at it from a different angle. I used to be 230 pounds and fat, really fat, and this person I'm going to bring on that I've worked with, I'm sitting at 165 and toned as can be. I can get on a rower, go like a bat out of hell, do a full-blown workout, smoke my mapacho and just keep going. So, and I think that's an important part of, where this podcast is going as well. Because, the world is doing what it's doing, right? And let it do what it's going to do. It's fine. But don't stop your progress because of that. And there is a way that you can get past all this trauma, all this emotional distress, all this mental confusion, all this lack of understanding. There is a way. It's a ruthless way. So, before we sign off in this first ever premiere episode of Wide Awake in Babylon, here's what I need you to know before we go any further. I'm not going to answer comments. If there's questions, I may answer those. But you got some rambling comment, I'm not paying attention. I don't have time for it. Right? I have 50 acres up here to take care of. I have people that, come up here on a regular basis, seeking some kind of, I don't know what exactly. I mean, you call it help, counseling, whatever. Call it whatever you want. I call it just, hanging out with people who will hear you and can respect you and can, you can be who you are. As long as you're not, a terror to others. Just be yourself, comfortable. So I don't want to play with trolls. Well, you didn't know Carlos. I've had comments of, oh, Toltecs don't wear shorts and that guy's in shorts. It's like, well, yeah, whatever. I'm not listening to mindless bullshit. I'm just not in the mood. Nor do I have to. So trolls, yeah, or, toxic, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to be raw. I'm going to be real. At times I'm going to be mean, I think. I will say things that nobody wants to hear. That it's just who I am. Because there's some things that need to be observed that are every individual's responsibility that they aren't doing. And that needs to be addressed. So if I come off like I feel like, that guy thinks he knows it all. Well, I don't know it all, but I know something. I would never claim to know it all. But in the area of expertise that I have dove into, I know something about that. As far as how to follow the rules in a human world so you don't lose your soul, I know something about that. I know how to handle very, very hard situations without actually hurting anyone. I might say something that might offend them, might trigger them. There's not hurting anyone. But I can be stern, and I can say things that most likely will get me banned in places, which is fine. But I want to be real. And I want to come at this from how I see consciousness. Just like everybody else who's doing a podcast are talking about it from their point of view. This one's going to come from mine. I'm hoping it's universal enough that maybe some of this can be transmitted. There's, like Carlos always told me, Cristobal. I'd ask him, Carlos, what are you teaching me? Because I couldn't figure it out. Cristobal, I'm not teaching you anything. You know what you need to learn. I'm like, so then what are we doing? He's like, well, I am definitely teaching you how to learn. So that's where I want to go with this. The next one, we'll just bring it up to speed, what I've been up to, that kind of thing. Then I'm going to do a little bit of a glossary because there's a lot of things I'm going to say over the course of, however far this podcast goes on. I don't intend to stop it anytime soon. And I intend there to be a lot of content because why not? There's, some things that I say quite frequently. And, those of you that know me already know that. You know what those words are. You know what I'm referring to. But I'm going to do like a little glossary of the words I use, this is what I mean. I don't mean what you think it means. I mean what I think it means. In order for that to happen, I got to tell you, okay, when I say this word, this is what I mean. Like, for example, if I say manufactured identity, what I mean is not you as you actually are as a being, the you make up in your head, the you that's composed of your beliefs and your upbringing, the conditioning, your education, who you think you are, all that crap. Not the actual person you are that's sitting there with a beating heart. So there's going to be a little bit of that. And then we're going to get into the more, freight train of the podcast guests. I'm going to, I've got some cool people here behind the camera that I definitely want to bring into this because they're characters and they're good people. And, get to know them. And they're making this happen. I said, I'll do it, but the only thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk. I don't want to deal with any computer shit of any kind. So he's the engineer. He's the producer. He's the wizard that gets it all put together. I've got people here that, will keep me in check if I start going off the rails into dangerous territory that makes it look like I'm going mad. I got them to check me and say, yo, tone it back. All right. If there's any content anybody wants to hear about, I can definitely address that. We can get into that. Anyway, this is called Wide Awake in Babylon, and it's a podcast. We're going to get it put on, the platforms around, so Spotify, YouTube, whatever's out there. I'm going to let those guys figure that out. But we'll keep you on Facebook updated to it, and then we're going to get out. Please help us get this out there, because I think this is important. I think there's a way that we can live with very little. You will own very little, and you will be profoundly, ecstatically beyond their reach. Let's say that. Instead of you will own nothing and be happy. You will own very little and be out of their reach consciously. They won't be able to invade your brain with all their, you got to be afraid. So that's really what this is about. Let's build the warriors. So I'm kind of thinking about what would be a sign off for a podcast like this. What would be the final shot? We'll start off with one, and we'll see where it goes from there. But here's going to be the sign off for now. Always celebrate your victories. Just make sure you put your war bonnet back on in the morning, because you still got more to go through. Anyway, that's the first episode. We'll get another one out here within a week. And then we'll start getting guests. We'll get a schedule up. We haven't got it built completely yet, but there'll be a Wide Awake in Babylon Facebook page. I don't know if we're going to do Twitter and Instagram and all that. If they want to, it's fine. Content's fine, but I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to really address these comments. Also, we are going to do some segments. I have some segments in mind. It's called Chris's Alter Ego. So you get to see another side of me that kind of shows up in here when I'm not in a good mood. That's fun to watch. Just me coming apart. It's kind of fun. It's not horrible. It's just like a bear stammering through the house. We're going to do one, The Devil's Advocate. Basically, that's going to be like messages from Satan to the human race. Basically, it's going to be like a roast of the human race from Satan's point of view because he's winning. And then we're going to do moments of triggering, which will be like, trigger points for, the people who get really, really offended, really, you think, I don't like the words you're using, it bothered me. So we'll do trigger points, and, we'll make sure that this is the trigger point segment. So if you're triggered, just maybe you don't want to watch this, or maybe you can get over yourself and laugh, one or the other. Anyway, this is the first one. Thank you for watching. I hope that, you keep following it, of course, and hey, we'll see where it goes. Anyway, have a great night. We'll be back probably next weekend. All right. But I'll keep updated as to how that's going. We'll have this is a makeshift studio for the moment. We'll have a whole new studio built. We got that going now. It'll be cool. We'll have a nice table and stuff going on. So anyway, thanks for tuning in, and have a good evening. And remember, celebrate your victories when you have them, but put your war bonnet back on in the morning because you got more shit to face. All right. Good night.